warriors from near and far. Welcome to another episode of The Crossroads with your host, Rashida Green. Let's start the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Crossroads. So, solo episode in full effect today. And as promised, I'm going to get into this. I don't want to call it a beauty, but we're going to get into this infrastructure bill. And I'm going to be taking this in chunks and walking through it, breaking it down. So that's what this is about today. But before we get there, we're going to give some flowers. First person I'm giving flowers to is a man by the name of Garrett Morgan. He was a Black inventor. He invented a lot of different things. He invented what was referred to as the safety hood. And basically that was a breathing device that was used to prevent inhaling of gas and smoke. And it became the prototype for gas. Do you hear me? Gas masks that were used during World War I. And in 1923, he developed what he is mostly known for, which is a traffic signal that warned drivers about when they needed to stop for oncoming traffic. So that's Garrett Morgan. And the second person I want to give some flowers to is Elijah Mccoy, who was also an inventor. He was from Michigan and has been credited with over 50 patents. And one of those patents was for the automatic lubricator, which was used on trains. Get your mind out of the gutter, get it out. Okay, so he also, in less salacious news, he also invented the folding ironing board. Now, the automatic lubricator was actually something that came at a really important time during railroad development. And it really was life-saving and also helped folks save their limbs too. So back then, trains had to stop every few miles continuously to have their parts oiled. And no surprise, McCoy was one of also a fireman and also responsible for helping to oil the trains. And he thought, I think there's a better and more efficient way to do this. So boom, the automatic lubricator. Now, and it's no surprise, again, that he experienced a lot of racism and a lot of setbacks in his career. He was educated abroad. And then when he came back into the States, completely different experience altogether. And this is also where the phrase, the real McCoy, comes from. A few other honorable mentions that I want to bring into this as well is a man named Granville T. Woods, Lewis Latimer, and Andrew Jackson Beard. They were all Black folks that helped in the development of what we now know as the modern railway system. Now let's get into this bill, okay? So if you have not been paying attention, which is fair because there's a lot of stuff going on and, you gotta pick your shit, right? So the infrastructure bill, it's out, it's out here in these streets. The purpose, literally in the streets, the purpose of this bill is to rebuild the roads, the bridges that are falling apart and replace lead pipes and provide high-speed internet to every family. The way that they plan to give us the results, give us the goods, so to speak, from this bill is with better union jobs, having domestic supply chain and manufacturing here in the US. And there's also increased racial equity, racial justice investments that are supposed to be going into communities of color. So there is an aspect of environmental justice as a part of this bill as well. It also includes the appointment of a man named Mitch Landrieu to the Senior Advisor and Infrastructure Implementation Coordinator position. Yes. And there's also an executive order to create the Infrastructure Implementation Task Force. And like any task force, their job is going to be to oversee the implementation of this plan across the country, right? So let's get into the roads and the bridges as a part of this bill. So the Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration are investing $27 billion to replace and repair bridges in all 50 states over the next 5 years. Now, keep that number 27 billion in your head, okay? And Vice President Harris is spearheading the EV charging action plan. And the point of this plan is to build a national network of electric cars, and so that they have charging stations and things like that across the country. Because right now, I don't know who has an electric car, I can tell you I don't, but with electric cars, there are charging stations, but they're not necessarily everywhere. So there's a little bit of a challenge in terms of getting those charging stations. That's the point of this plan, is to make sure that that gets implemented so more people can have opportunities to charge their cars. And this, as a part of this plan, the Transportation Secretary, that's Pete Buttigieg, if you are following, and also the Energy Secretary are forming the Joint Energy and Transportation Office. So basically, these two are coming together to unite and work on some of the actions as a part of this infrastructure bill. Not skipping, but moving on to water. Another number you're going to have to keep in your heads. So $75 billion is being allocated to states to upgrade their sewer systems, the pipes, and service lines. There's the lead pipe and paint action plan. And the purpose of this plan is to accelerate lead pipe replacement over the next 10 years. $3 million is being allocated by the EPA to fund states and tribes so that lead pipes can, in fact, be replaced. Now, I also mentioned that internet was a part of this gig. And there's the Affordable Connectivity Program. And the purpose of this program is to provide internet services to everybody. So for low-income households, that would be prices about $30 per month for internet. And for tribal lands, $75 a month. And that doesn't sit well in my spirit. I don't know why it's higher for tribal communities than it is for low income. But again, I'm not doing all this today. I've picked what I'd like to talk about today, and I can't get outraged about everything. Anyhow, as a part of this program, there's also going to be $100 provided so that folks can purchase different types of hardware, computers, things like that. And there's also the Reconnect Rural Broadband Program. Now, this program is something that folks have to apply for to get the funding, but there's $1.15 billion that's being allocated in funding for states, local territories and governments, local territorial governments, corporations, native tribes that can, if they put their application in that they're going to provide broadband in their community, they have access to this money. And like I mentioned, there is more in addition to just these areas, the water, the internet, and the lead pipes that I mentioned, that's also a part of this. But for the purpose of our discussion today, I'm just going to focus on lead pipes and these roads. Lead pipes. Now, if you've listened to my show, you know that I've talked about this in the past. So this is just more of a kind of a build on that. So according to the Natural Resources Defense Council, the NRDC, there are up to 12.8 million lead pipes across all 50 states. And this is an estimate and a low one at that, because not all states provide or have provided accurate data. So this is probably not even a full capture. And to kind of break it down a little bit, so to get into where the NRDC gets their information from. So 10 states provided data directly to the council as requested. 23 of those states said they don't keep track of any of that. Georgia, Massachusetts, and Missouri were like in the middle of doing their own surveying and collection of data. So they didn't really have anything to give at the time. That probably has since changed. And everybody else was like, yeah, we don't know. Or they only had partial data for like half the state. Yeah. Okay. And 56% of the US population right now are drinking water from systems that exceed the recommended levels of lead. And we know, of course, we have talked before and we will continue because it don't stop, that, the most prominent city that people think about when they think about lead and improper water or contaminated water is they think about Flint, Michigan. But there are other cities and states that are encountering the exact same issue. For example, in 2018 and 2019, Newark, New Jersey had higher levels of lead in their water than any other city in the US. Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania was also having similar issues, and they are working towards replacing their lead pipes by 2026. Now, if you're me, the first question that you're probably asking is, well, what are people supposed to do in the meantime? And I'm glad that's where your mind is. Let's keep going, because I'm going to switch gears real quick and then I'm going to come back. Let's talk about the roads. Talk about these here roads. Now, according to an article published by USA Today, 21.8% of roads, bridges, and railroads are in poor condition, and 7.6% of bridges need to be repaired. Oh my God. 7.6% of bridges need to be replaced or repaired. From 2015 to 2019, there were several train derailments. And we also know that there were bridges that were also just straight up collapsing. And transportation infrastructure is being maintained by the states in general. And they use the tax revenue from gas sales to help to do that. But we know, just depending on where you live, each state and region has different challenges when it comes to maintaining their infrastructure, specifically weather. Like if you think about some cities or some states that have really extreme winters, you think about like cities and states in the South that have very extreme summers. So that's the other element that is having an impact, in addition to the sheer number of folks using roads, using bridges, railroads every single day. And a more recent report actually shows that while USA Today is on the money, it's actually a lot higher. It's actually 43% of public roads that are considered to be poor or in mediocre condition. Even worse. Now, let's dive a little bit deeper. A infrastructure report card, it's a real thing, not making it up. The infrastructure report card estimates that roadway maintenance would cost $786 billion. I just had to pause for a little bit because that's okay. 786 billion. And this includes the massive backlogs of repairs that have just gone unaddressed. Now let's break this down. So 435 billion would be needed for existing roads that people are driving on every day right now. 125 billion is needed for bridge repair. 120 billion is needed to expand current systems, and 105 billion is needed to enhance those current systems, like to make them better, make them more functional. That's the breakdown. That's how much money is needed. Now, this infrastructure bill, that number I told you to keep in your head, 27 billion is being invested in the roads. So the report card says 786 billion. And see, this here bill says 27 billion. Yes. And states are trying to make up for this gigantic reach and shortfall of money by increasing taxes on gas. And I'm sure y'all are triggered, and that's fine. I also want to pull the car over to let you know that while the horse jokes are funny, having a horse is just as expensive, if not more so, than your Corolla. Okay. And since 2010, 37 states have been increasing their taxes on gas. And some states are even considering a mileage-based user fee, which I can only assume would sort of be like a tolls type of system. But largely, states are really going to need federal funding to make these repairs and these enhancements actually work. Now let's shift out a little bit. Let's look at this from a global perspective. There's a scoring system that rates infrastructure quality on a scale from 0 to 100. Countries like Singapore, the Netherlands, Hong Kong, Switzerland, and Japan all have scores of 93 and above. There are others, it's a long list, of course. And the US is number 13. So factors for this score are road connectivity, railroad density, and in other aspects too, like exposure to unsafe drinking water. Now, Singapore, this original study that I found was from like 2019, and the 2021 data actually still shows Singapore dominating over everybody. And that's because they have and continue to make investments in their infrastructure to the tune of $10 billion every year. And this does not just stop at investing in roads, but it's also education and living standards for their citizens. So we've come to the crossroads. Now you're probably wondering, or maybe you're wondering, what is the point of you telling me all of this? Why do I care about Joe Biden's bill? Is anyone going to talk about the fact that like he goes to bed at 7 o'clock? Is anyone going to talk about the fact that all the things that he told Black folk he was going to do have yet to be done? And you know what? I don't have all the answers, but let me tell you why I'm talking to you about this. So let's get into a little bit more of this here, of this data. The average bridge in the US is 42 years old. Yes, 42. That's the guy in the club with his t-shirt on, his polo shirt he bought at Marshall's, covering up his pooch sack, doing the two-step to Playboy Cardi. Okay, 42 years old. All right. And no offense to the 40-year-olds, don't y'all come at me. Now, back in 2012, 11%, these are the data, this is the data. And we already know what the data is giving, right? We already know that this is like an estimate that it's probably a lot worse than what we're saying. But 11% of the 607,000 bridges in the US were deemed structurally deficient. And again, like I mentioned, the estimates that are required to really repair our infrastructure is probably a lot higher than what the data shows, and also, and certainly, what is allocated in this bill. In my opinion, like most of the time, especially for federal legislation, is that it doesn't go far enough. We know that redlining has and continues to have a significant impact on the Black community and other marginalized communities as well. Redlined neighborhoods have inadequate and non-existing plumbing services when they were built. Buildings that were owned by slumlords used lead paint because lead paint was considered to be more durable, and they didn't want to have to go back and forth and make any kind of repairs or adjustments. They just wanted to collect the money. And unfortunately, when we're talking about lead paint is sweet. So when there's paint chips, when the paint begins to fall apart, kids eat it. They have eaten it. And kids are more susceptible to the negative impacts of lead. And it causes developmental challenges for them. So what are we supposed to do? I've talked about roads. I've talked about bridges. I've talked about lead pipe and lead paint. So what are we supposed to do? Now, if you think or suspect that you are having any issues with lead, or you're concerned about your water, get it tested. You can go to the EPA's website or your state or your county website. They have access or levels of access for companies that can provide lead testing. They may send you an in-home kit for you to test your water as well. You can also check out Healthy Babies, Bright Future, and they can help provide that support for you as well. If you as I understand that buying tons and tons of bottles of water may not be realistic for you. You may not have a car, or you may not have a Costco or any type of large store near you, or it may be difficult for you to transport all that water by yourself. There's so many different factors. So if for any reason that's not feasible for you, use only cold tap water to drink. Don't like warm or hot water just concentrates the lead in the water. So boiling it is not effective. And you can install water filters. There's a few options to do that. You can't, the Home Depot, I believe, has some filtration that you can purchase. You know, if if anyone is close to we used to call them, what are those, like the Army supply stores? They have those survival kits, and they usually have water purification droplets or tabs that you can stick in your water as well. But if you can, of course, it would be recommended to purchase yourself some bottles of water. That's actually one of if you're into that survival, I'm laughing for a couple of reasons, not because it's funny. I'm laughing because I had a friend that was very into survival. And that was one of the many things that she recommended, was having that like to-go kit. Whenever you need to get certain things that if things get shut down. And really and truly, it's not even just so much about surviving the apocalypse. And shout out to anybody who's read or who is reading Parable of a Sower, because you already know what I'm talking about. But like a lot of those things, buying the food rations and all that, they really can be the most beneficial for us when we are experiencing any type of unemployment or any type of local natural disaster. Like these are the things that help you. And this is all what FEMA calls emergency preparedness. So these are just some tips that you can use, but I would definitely recommend, if you have an extra $10, $20, getting a case of water and just kind of making that an investment that you do, investing in canned goods. I saw someone on TikTok talking about that with the rise in gas prices, that these are the things that you should stock up on. But I digress. So those are the things that you can do if you're concerned about lead. Another key point about lead as well is use filtered or bottled water for your baby formula and for the baby's food as well. And test your kids for lead exposure. Even locally in DC, a couple of years ago, in fact, there were high levels of lead in kids' bloodstreams. And like I mentioned, lead exposure is difficult to pinpoint, but children are very, very susceptible to it. Also, there are local and state elections coming to a voting booth near you. Primaries are in June, general elections in November. This includes your city and your county council seats. This includes your reps and your state legislator and your representation at the federal level in Congress and the Senate. Okay. So first, consult Le Google. Look up these people who are running in your area. I actually have a nice little list of Black candidates that are running for the U.S. Senate in different states. First, Malcolm Kenyatta, running for U.S. Senate in Pennsylvania. Gary Chambers Jr., he's running for Senate in Louisiana, and I've talked about him before. He also, just a quick side note, he also supports the legalization of marijuana. There's Val Demings, who's running in Florida, and Mandela Barnes running in Wisconsin. And again, that's just a tiny little list. So there are others. So please do your Googles. Another thing I would also encourage while you're doing your Googles to check these folks' platforms. Are they lobbying for investment in public transportation? I mean, kind of bringing it back to on the local level to the DMV. Think about the metro system. Every single time we think about metro stations and where they're located, what usually comes around them? Apartments, right? Apartments or other types of housing. But usually it's so expensive that most people can't afford to live there. And that's all on purpose. And why is it that only people who can afford it, who probably don't need to take public transportation, are the ones that are being offered? If you can afford to pay I don't even want to tell you. But if you can afford a $500,000 house, if you can afford $2,500 a month in rent, do you also, is the likelihood also that you probably have a car, that you probably have some access or level to access for ride sharing? I mean, which we don't get into. That's another important aspect we can get into as well. But like, think about that stuff. The people who need public transportation have to live further away from it just to be able to get the access to it that they need, which is ridiculous. So in essence, they're living further away. It takes more time and more money for them to take a bus or one or two buses to get to the train. And then they have to take however many train stops or exchange trains just to get to work every day. That's costly. As we know, it is not cheap to ride the metro. It can also be stressful, especially when there are delays. And just think about that. And wouldn't it be easier or better if there was a bigger investment in our local transportation so that maybe we don't have to drive our cars as much for those of us that maybe don't even have the option to do so in the first place? I'm getting hype. I'm sorry. I'm getting hype. And last, for folks that can or have need access to it, folks should really also consider carpooling or slug lanes or other forms of ride sharing. I know in the age of COVID, you're probably like, girl, I am not riding in the back of anybody's anything. I'm not doing it. And I completely understand the hesitation. I know that here in the DC area, slug lanes are very popular, where you just hitch a ride with someone. You can pay for their gas. You can, offer to use your car just to kind of make things fair and even. But this is not only a way to save some money, it also helps with the reduction of carbon emission. And it's an opportunity to save on gas, because I do understand that with the rise in gas prices and everything that's going on right now, it is really difficult to know where to put your focus. But I would look at some candidates. I would see what they're talking about. I would see what their platforms stand on and stand for. And you know what? I wouldn't be afraid to hit Joe Biden or anyone else for that matter and ask them, how do you exactly plan to roll out this bill? I mean, they're rolling it out now as we speak. But what I mean is, how do you plan to make this fit? How are you working with the states? How exactly do you plan to put these electric charging stations? Are these cars going to be made affordable so that people can purchase them? I don't know. These are things that are still not clear. And there are aspects of this plan and this bill that I have not touched yet. And again, you can expect me to continue to bring this up throughout this season. I just wanted to give you a quick initial dive, but these are some of the questions that I'm going to be asking. These are some of the things that I want to get a little bit more deep and get into a little bit more depth. But I hope you have enjoyed this episode. The Crossroads podcast is available on all platforms. You can follow me on, don't follow me on Facebook. I'm not really on there, but if you want to. But I'm on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Yes, God, and YouTube as well. And you can reach out to me, follow me on my website, allroadscross.com. And in the next coming episodes, we're going to get into the stolen lands and some other interviews as well. But I thank you all for joining me. I hope this resonated with you. If you have any ideas or things that you want me to dive into a little bit more in depth, please let me know. Again, it is always a pleasure to be with you, and we will see you again at the Crossroads.